The throne room of King Varian was a monument to power. Pillars of black obsidian rose like the bones of ancient titans. Banners of red and silver hung high from the vaulted ceilings, and the air shimmered with the faint hum of energy shields. Here, in the heart of the Vetheri Empire, strength was everything: strength of body, of will, of bloodline. And that was why the whispers hurt so deeply. Princess Lysera stood at the far end of the hall, her head bowed, her thin hands clasped together to hide their trembling. She had always been small, even as a child, where other Vetheri children grew tall and broad-shouldered. With bone ridges that promised future armor, Lysara's frame stayed slight and delicate. Her skin was pale where it should have been bronze. Her bones seemed like glass under her soft flesh, and she often collapsed from exhaustion after only a short walk. The Vetheri called her silken-boned, a term spoken with pity or with disdain. King Varian had watched his daughter grow up like a fragile leaf in a storm. He had tried everything: the Empire's finest physicians, advanced genetic therapies, even the ceremonial bloodbaths of warrior tradition. Nothing changed her frailty. And while he loved her in the quiet corners of his heart, love was not a thing the court valued. To them, a weak heir was a liability, a crack in the Empire's iron wall. For months, his war council urged him to quietly strip her of title and spirit her away to some remote moon, far from the eyes of their proud people. But Varian was too proud, too desperate. He did something none of his ancestors had ever done. He summoned a human Captain Elias Rourke, arrived on a cold wind, striding into the throne room like a living weapon. He was everything the Vetheri feared and admired about humanity: tall, broad-chested, covered in scars like metals, and with eyes as cold as the void. His presence alone drew instinctive tension from the guards who lined the walls. Humans were considered unpredictable, even feral. By the Vetheriet, they had defeated empires 10 times their size, and that was exactly what Varian wanted. "This," Varian said, his deep voice echoing, "is my daughter." He gestured to Lysera, who stood still as a marble statue, though her heart thudded painfully. "She is unworthy, too frail to bear our crest. I will not see her perish in the trials, nor bring shame to our bloodline. So I give her to you, human. Make of her what your kind will." Gasps swept through the council chamber. A Vetheri king giving his blood heir to an alien? It was unthinkable, almost blasphemous. But Varian stood unflinching, as though daring anyone to challenge him. Lysera's mind spun. Give me away? Like a burden? Like an object? She had always known she was different, but to be cast off so openly burned like acid in her chest? She wanted to scream, to beg, but her voice locked in her throat. Captain Rourke walked toward her, slow and deliberate. She expected mockery, perhaps contempt. The humans were known to be blunt and scathing, but he only studied her, eyes tracing the lines of her fragile frame, the small flicker of defiance in her posture. Then he spoke, low and even, his voice like distant thunder. "Strength," he said, "isn't born. It's built, and fire isn't given. It's chosen." Lysera blinked up at him. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not with pity, not with scorn, but with simple expectation, as though he believed there could be something inside her worth forging. Elias straightened and nodded to the king. "I'll take her." That was how it happened. No ceremony, no tears. The moment was almost casual. And yet it split her life cleanly into 2 halves. The life she had lived as a porcelain doll locked in a gilded cage, and the unknown life awaiting her beyond the stars. As she walked from the throne room beside the human warrior, the last thing she heard was the sound of the council's whispers following her like knives. She will not survive them.
"I'm one hissed."
She will break, another muttered. Lys Era kept walking. Silent. The Iron Dawn was nothing like the marble palaces and crystal gardens of Vether Prime. It was steel and shadows. The constant hum of vengeance, and the sharp temps of oil in the air. The corridors were narrow, the walls scratched with years of service, and the crew, every one of them human, moved with brisk, unyielding confidence, to Lysera. It felt like she had stepped into the belly of some enormous beast. A beast that never slept. Captain Elias Rourke wasted no time. From the first day, he made it clear she was not a princess here. She was a recruit, and recruits trained until they bled. The physical drills began at dawn. Running through the ship's long corridors while alarms blared, climbing cargo scaffolds until her arms screamed, practicing combat roles until her delicate joints ached. When she faltered, no one helped her. Humans didn't coddle weakness, they expected resistance. At first, Lysera hated them for it. Her muscles trembled like snapped wires, her chest burned with every breath. And she often crumpled to the cold metal floors, gasping and humiliated. The crew would jog past her, sweat-soaked and grinning, shouting things like, "Come on, Flare. Don't let gravity win." She didn't understand how they could laugh while enduring such punishment, but slowly, she began to notice something different in their eyes. Not cruelty, not mockery, expectation. Humans, she realized, didn't see failure as shame. They saw it as a step. Every fall was just part of the climb. And every time she pushed herself upright again, they cheered not because she was weak, but because she refused to stay down. Elias watched her progress in silence. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words landed like hammer blows. Pain is proof you're trying. Fear means you care about the outcome. Use it. Nobody's born strong, princess. We build strong. It wasn't just her body that was changing, it was her mind. The humans taught her to fight with more than muscles. They drilled her in strategy and tactics, in how to read an opponent's movements, how to outthink faster enemies, how to use terrain and timing. Elias ran endless simulations, boarding actions, ambush scenarios, ship-to-ship, skirmishes. Lysera failed dozens of times, but each failure etched lessons into her bones. One day, during a sparring session, she found herself facing Sergeant Dax, a grizzled human marine twice her size. He lunged with the force of a charging beast. The old Lysera would have panicked, but this Lysera rolled aside, hooked his ankle, and used his own momentum to slam him flat on his back. The clang echoed through the training deck. The other humans erupted into applause and hollers, panting. Stunned, Lysera realized something profound. She was smiling. Through her sweat, through her bruises, she was smiling. Her hands were still trembling, but they were trembling from adrenaline, not fear. Weeks turned to months. Her once slender frame began to harden, muscles stringing like cords beneath her pale skin. She could run the ship's length without faltering, lift her own body weight, and spar for hours without collapsing. The humans started calling her Flare because during combat drills, her golden eyes burned with such intensity that even seasoned Marines hesitated. Elias never praised her directly. But one evening, she caught him watching her from the upper catwalk as she finished a brutal endurance circuit. His expression was subtle, just the faintest tug of a smile at the corner of his mouth. It was the closest thing to approval she'd ever seen from him. And to her surprise, it mattered more than the praise of courtiers. More than the hollow title she'd once carried, it mattered because she had earned it. By the end of her 4th month aboard the Iron Dawn, Lysera no longer moved like a fragile glass figure. She moved like a blade, lean, sharp, and unyielding. She still bore the memory of frailty, but it had become fuel, not chains. And perhaps most astonishing to her, she no longer felt out of place among the humans. Where once they had seemed alien and wild, now she understood them, their laughter and hardship, their refusal to yield, their fierce loyalty to those who fought beside them. For the first time in her life, Lysera felt she belonged, not as a princess. By the time her 6th month aboard the Iron Dawn ended, Lysera had become almost unrecognizable from the trembling girl who had first stepped onto its cold decks. Yet despite her progress, Captain Elias Rourke knew that no amount of drills could truly forge a warrior knot until she stood in real danger, with real lives on the line, and so he gave her what she feared and craved in equal measure. Her first combat mission, it was supposed to be simple. The Iron Dawn would escort a cluster of medical freighters through the Gray Scar. Belt a ragged stretch of space notorious for pirate ambushes. Intelligence suggested only light raider presence. Nothing the human marines couldn't handle, but deep inside, Lysera knew this was more than a mission. It was a crucible. Either she would reese, or she would shatter. The moment the convoy entered the belt, everything went wrong. Pirate ships erupted from behind the asteroid fields like a swarm of steel insects. Dozens of small, fast skimmers, their hulls patched and jagged, armed with scavenged plasma cannons. They came screaming in on attack vectors, spewing fire across the void. The Iron Dawn jolted under the first barrage. Red emergency lights strobed through the corridors. The klaxons blared like furious beasts. Lysera stood at the armory bay, suited in her combat armor, rifle trembling slightly in her hands. Her breath came sharp and shallow. This was no simulation. There were no safeties, no resets. Every blast outside shook the air with the reminder, if you fail, people die. Elias strode past her, calm as stone, shouting orders into his cum. Boarding teams on deck 3. Defense cannons hot. Keep the freighters behind our hull. Then his gaze flicked to her. For an instant, his eyes locked on hers, and he gave the smallest nod. No words. Just belief. It steadied her. The pirates latched onto the ship's hull like parasites, breaching with thermal cutters. The first firefight exploded in the cargo bay. Lysera followed Sergeant Dax's squad as they advanced through smoke and flashing lights. The noise was deafening, plasma bolts shrieking past her ears. Metal shrieking under impacts, human war cries clashing with guttural pirate roars. At first, her instincts screamed at her to flee. Every sound was too loud, every shadow a threat. She ducked behind a crate, heart hammering. Then she saw it. A human marine crumpled beside her, hit in the shoulder. Trying to crawl to cover while enemy boots closed in, something inside her snapped. Lysera surged up with a roar that startled even herself. She darted from cover, snatching the fallen marine's sidearm as she charged. Her body moved on instinct, low, fast, weaving between the crates. A pirate swung his rifle toward her. She slid under the barrel and fired upward, dropping him instantly. She didn't feel fear anymore, only focus. The world narrowed to motion and survival. Her every step echoed the drills she had cursed, every strike the culmination of sweat-soaked nights. She remembered Ilias's voice in her head. Use fear as fuel. Burn with it. And she burned. Minutes stretched into an eternity. When the final pirate skimmer broke away and fled, silence fell heavy over the bay. Broken only by the hiss of cooling metal, Lysera stood at the center of it all. Chest heaving, her armor scorched and smeared with grime. Around her lay the wreckage of the boarding party, and beyond the hull, the black void where their ships had scattered, the humans gathered slowly, staring at her. Sergeant Dax gave a low whistle. Not bad, Flare, he muttered, almost reverently. Lysera blinked, still half lost in the adrenaline haze. Then she realized her hands were steady. Not trembling from fear, steady from control. She had fought. She had won, and no one looked at her like she was fragile anymore. Later, as the crew patched wounds and repaired hull breaches, Elias found her sitting alone in the observation deck, staring at the drifting stars. You didn't freeze, he said simply. I did, she admitted. But then, I moved anyway. He studied her for a long moment, then gave the faintest smile. That's all a warrior really is. Then he left her there, alone with the stars and her pounding heart. Lysera watched her reflection in the glass armor blackened, golden eyes blazing. For the first time, she didn't see a porcelain doll or a fragile shadow. She saw a fighter. The Iron Dawn cut through the void toward Vether Prime like a silent blade, its hull still bearing the fresh scars of the Gray Scar ambush. Inside, the human crew went about their duties with their usual casual confidence. But for Lysera, every step closer to her homeworld felt heavier than the armor she wore. It had been nearly a full Vethery cycle since she had left as the king's frail, unwanted daughter. The memory of that day still burned in her mind, the cold judgment in the council's eyes. The sharp whispers of silken-boned and liability, the hollow silence when her father had given her. She had been nothing then, a burden dressed in royal silk. But she was not nothing anymore. Elias had said little as they approached orbit. He stood beside her on the bridge, arms folded, gaze fixed on the distant glimmer of Vether's surface. "You don't owe them anything," he said at last, his voice low. "But if you choose to show them who you've become, don't do it with words." Lysira nodded. She understood. Words could be denied. Strength could not. The landing bay of the royal citadel roared with activity as the iron dawn descended on pillars of flame. Vethery guards in ornate armor lined the approach, their spears like gleaming spines. The king's high council stood in attendance, their posture rigid, their expressions carefully neutral, and at their center, on a black marble dais, stood King Varian. He was older than she remembered. Though perhaps it was just that she now stood taller, stronger, his bronze skin seemed dulled, his once proud eyes wary. As Lysira descended the ramp, her armored boots striking the stone like hammer beats, the entire courtyard fell into an unnatural stillness. The whispers began almost immediately. "She lives? She returns. Impossible." Lysira ignored them. She walked like the humans had taught her. Head high, gaze unwavering, stride steady as steel. The black and red combat armor she wore bore deep scoring from plasma strikes, each mark a silent testament. A sleek human blade rested across her back. Her golden eyes gleamed like molten metal. She stopped at the foot of the dais, facing the father who had discarded her. Varian's jaw tightened. "You are changed." "I am forged," Lysira replied, her voice like tempered glass, strong, unyielding, "not by your court, not by your trials, by the humans you gave me to." The council stirred in shock. One of the elder ministers sneered, "You speak boldly for one who was cast aside." Lysira's gaze snapped to him. "I was not cast aside," she said. "I was tempered. While you whispered of my weakness, I bled and stood again. While you predicted my death, I stood between your people and pirates, and did not fall." A murmur rippled through the gathered nobles. She reached into the satchel at her waist and tossed something onto the marble steps. It clattered and skidded to a stop at Varian's feet, the insignia of a human combat unit, scorched black at the edges. "I earned this," she said. "Not because of my blood or your name or ancient rights. I earned it because I chose to rise." The words hung in the air like crackling lightning. Varian rose slowly from his throne. His imposing height still cast a long shadow, but Lysira did not flinch. For the first time, he seemed to truly see her not as the brittle child he had failed to mend, but as something new, something he had not made. "You stood in battle?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said, "and I did not break." Silence stretched like drawn steel. Then Varian did something none of the council expected. He stepped down from the dais. He stopped before her, close enough that his cloak brushed her shoulder, and lowered his head not fully, but enough. A gesture not of submission, but of acknowledgement. "You carry the fire of two worlds now," he said. Lysira held his gaze. "No," she answered softly. "I carry the fire I lit myself." The courtyard erupted in gasps. Even the wind seemed to pause. For the first time in her life, no one looked at her as frail. They looked at her as dangerous. Everywhere she walked within the marble halls of the royal citadel, eyes followed. Guards straightened. Nobles stepped aside. Courtiers who once turned their backs now spoke in careful, measured tones. But Lysira felt none of the giddy triumph she had imagined as a child. She did not bask in their newfound reverence. It felt hollow, like applause from strangers after a war they hadn't fought. She hadn't returned to impress them. She had returned to change them. King Varian summoned her to the war hall a few days after her arrival. It was the same chamber where he had once given her same obsidian pillars, same cold stares from the council. But this time, she did not approach timidly. She strode in with her human-forged armor glinting under the torchlight. Her posture relaxed, yet coiled like a drawn bowstring. Varian regarded her for a long while before speaking. "You've become something. Unexpected," he said. "My council debates what to make of you. Some say you are a symbol of our shame, others of our hope." Lysara's lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. "I am neither," she said. "I am proof." "Of what?" "That strength can be chosen. That it is not granted by birth or bloodline. That your trials, your obsession with purging weakness, blinds you to what weakness truly is." The chamber fell silent. Varian's gaze hardened, but not with anger, more like an old sword testing its edge. "And what is weakness then?" Refusing to rise, Lysara said simply. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Varian exhaled slowly, almost like a sigh carried across years. "Then rise," he said. "Not as my daughter. As a warrior of this empire." The announcement shocked the court. Lysara would not be reinstated as princess. Instead, she was to undergo the warrior's trial-in ancient ordeal once thought beyond her frail body. Victory meant command. Failure meant exile. The humans had trained her to crave challenges, not shrink from them. So she accepted without hesitation. The trial was brutal. 3 days in the Blood Canyons. Jagged wasteland teeming with native predators and automated hunter drones. Competitors had to survive, navigate to the summit, and plant their banner while defending it from all challengers. Lysara entered alone. The old her would have crumbled on the first climb. The new her ascended with patience, discipline, and lethal precision. She moved like shadow between the rocks, striking and vanishing, conserving her strength as the humans had taught her. Predators lunged from the mist. She sidestepped and cut them down with clean efficiency. Drones swarmed. She lured them into crossfire traps she built from scavenged parts. Storms ripped across the canyon floor. She dug in, endured, and pushed on. On the third dawn, bloodied and exhausted, she stood atop the highest spire, her black-red banner snapping in the wind. No challengers came, not because they feared the terrain, because they feared her. When she returned to the citadel, the Empire roared. The council bowed low. Soldiers saluted. Even the commoners sang her name in the streets. Lysara of the Iron Dawn. Lysara the Unbroken. And for the first time in her life, King Varian placed his hand on her shoulder not as a father lifting a fragile child, but as a sovereign honoring an equal. "You are no longer my burden," he said softly. "You are my blade." Lysara met his eyes. "No," she replied. "I am my blade." Weeks later, as the Iron Dawn prepared to depart, Elias found her standing alone at the edge of the landing platform, wind whipping her dark hair. "You've changed them," he said. "No," she answered. "I showed them what change looks like." Elias gave one of his rare, faint smiles. "Then you're ready." "Ready for what?" "For whatever comes next." She turned to him then, her armor gleaming under the rising sun, her golden eyes steady as a star's heart. "I'm not afraid of what comes next," she said. "Because I know what I am now?" Elias tilted his head. "And what's that?" Lysara's voice was quiet but carried like a blade drawn from its sheath, fearless. And as the Iron Dawn rose into the skies once more, Lysara watched her homeworld shrink beneath her feet, no longer the place that had rejected her, but the world that had forged its first warrior, who chose her own fire. She was no longer frail, no longer given away. She had returned, and she had risen as a warrior, as a legend, as the fearless,